with the Bitcoin Policy Institute, what is it you're actually trying to do? What are the outcomes? I know you're trying to affect policy.
Yeah.
But like, what are the wins? What are the goals here?
I mean, I think like there are sort of several baskets of goals. I can kind of go through them in turn. So one is that I think this bull market in particular, from the sort of regulatory side, was characterized by a really sort of outsized presence in DC by like crypto and like Web3 interests because they're all centralized. And so, you have a token or a project or a VC fund, and, it's like, oh, very reasonable. It's a cost of doing business, right? You like take some percentage of your capital and you hire a lobbying firm and you hire policy people, and they go, when there's conversations happening about policy, it's like, oh, well, who do we invite? Oh, let's invite the policy guys from A16Z and from, these various companies. So you had this dynamic where Bitcoin, despite being like the, like half the market cap of all digital assets, didn't really have a seat at the table. And you have to give credit to like Jerry and Niraj and Peter and that crew, because I think Coin Center has done, and they've been doing this for way longer than us for a long time and doing a great job at it. But outside of them, like there wasn't really a Bitcoin seat at the table. So like one KPI is like, how often are we looped into these discussions? How often are we able to kind of sit at the table and bring the perspective of people that are chiefly interested in Bitcoin? Like, I wouldn't say I'm a Bitcoin like maximalist per se, but Bitcoin is really the only crypto that I care that much about and that like, makes me passionate. And so one kind of KPI is like, are we getting a seat at the table? Because Bitcoin, by nature of being a decentralized technology and truly decentralized, doesn't have a CEO, doesn't have a de facto lobbying budget. And there's no one to call, right? Like, you can call the CEO of Ripple if you want to have a congressional hearing about XRP. You can't call Satoshi to come testify in Congress. And so that's like one like meta goal is like not speaking for Bitcoin because we're just like one organization, but being an organization that's like there day in and day out doing the work that has sort of Bitcoin top of mind. Another goal is sort of promoting like more research on Bitcoin. So one of the interesting things that I noticed when I was recruiting scholars for BPI was that there was a bit of trepidation among a lot of them. They were worried about how their peers would see them, how it might affect their tenure chances. They were worried about sort of the very much like the academia that like the Bitcoin community likes to criticize fairly, thinking differently of them for dedicating time to researching Bitcoin. And so another goal is like, well, if we have this sort of structure, it gives people who are in academia something to point to their colleagues, to their advisors, whoever, and say, I promise I'm not crazy. Like I'm working at this think tank that's working on this. And there's kind of a network effect of that, right? Like the more people like Troy and all of these people, Margot, like the more people like this who are out and researching Bitcoin as academics, it makes it that much easier for the next sort of person to shift their scholarly focus maybe away from something else and toward Bitcoin. And then the other goal, and like sort of the terminal goal, I think would be living in a world in which everyone in DC at least understands the argument for why Bitcoin is good. Like, I think it's a bit ambitious to say we're going to like orange pill everyone in the world. Like that's dumb. But at least
understand.
At least know why it's different than crypto, like broadly. And, it's like, if you're a pro-gun control person, you could at least sort of give the other side's argument, right?
Yeah.
That's like a world I want to live in, where people don't look at you like you have two heads when you say, no, Bitcoin is like really good for, the billions of people that live in countries with runaway inflation or authoritarian regimes. Instead of being, I may not like Bitcoin, but at least I know that is a reason people like it. So
yeah, and that comes back to your debating skills, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So what is a win for you, and have you had any significant wins yet?
Yeah. I think going by those KPIs that I kind of mentioned, the major win that I'm most proud of is like getting this thing off its feet and, it existing. Like it's been a real struggle to raise money for this, to like keep the lights on. So the fact that we're still here a year in, big win. But I think some of our bigger wins have come from like shifting the Overton window around Bitcoin in DC, like influencing other think tanks. We have a sort of subscriber list we send out like emails to, and kind of seeing more and more people subscribing to our email list with like .gov email addresses, like Senate staffers, congressional staffers. Troy got invited to brief the White House on Bitcoin mining, which was so cool. Matt's national security paper, he'll have to tell you about this because I don't know a ton of the details, but I know that got passed around through the CIA, which is pretty cool.
Is that cool? Is that a good thing?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, it's information, right? Which yearns to be free. So I think it's, I'd rather them reading that than reading Stephen Deal or like David Gerard's opinion on Bitcoin.
Yeah, well, fuck David Gerard.
Yeah. So, I think that's great. Cause I mean, look, I might get canceled for this, but I don't think that the interests of the Central Intelligence Agency are that disparate from, the outcomes that Bitcoin engenders. Like you can love Bitcoin and hate the CIA, but, I think Bitcoin like undermines communist states. Like I think Bitcoin spreads freedom and democracy. I think Bitcoin makes it easier for people in closed societies to vote with their feet and vote with their capital and expatriate their wealth from like Orwellian regimes to the United States.
I'm almost certain I got a visit from the CIA in El Salvador. Have I talked about that on the show?
I don't know. You've definitely told me, but I'm not sure you said it on the show.
I had this weird experience, man. So like when I went to interview President Bukele, there was someone from a bunch of people from USAID outside the room. They had a meeting with Bukele, and I think they were like, who's this guy in a metallic shirt with tattoos? So this guy comes up to me and is like, hi, who are you? What are you doing here? I was like, I've got a meeting with the president about Bitcoin. He was like, what do you do? I was like, I have a podcast. I'm going to be interviewing him in a few days. And he was like, we're really interested in this Bitcoin thing. Can we talk to you about it? And I was like, yeah, fine. So he gave his boss my number. And next day I get a call and said, do you want to come down to the US Embassy and talk to us about this? I was like, nope. But you can come to my hotel. This is where I'm staying. Anyway, these three dudes turn up, and like the one guy was like, hi, I'm so-and-so, I work for USAID. The second one was like, hi, I'm so-and-so, I work for the State Department. And then this third guy who basically, he kind of looked like, when you see those guys running along the side of the president's motorcade? Like full chisel jaw, like
Secret Service.
Chris suit. And he was like, hi, I'm so-and-so, I work for the government. I was like, okay. Anyway, so like the first guy would be like, how does mining work? And then the second guy was like, why is there 21 million? And then that guy would be like, if you were a gang in Honduras, how would you use Bitcoin to facilitate money laundering?
Yeah.
And it's just like this really weird experience. And I was just like, why would he just say I work for the government? Like, why would he tell me which department? It might not have been anything.
Yeah. But, well, and it's, these things are always like double-edged swords, right? Like one of the sort of things I like to talk about when I'm in meetings with like staffers about Bitcoin is that you can make all the same arguments against Bitcoin against like Tor, right? But the Tor was born out of the U.S. Naval Research Lab, was funded and open sourced by U.S. intelligence agencies, and to this day, I believe receives like upwards of 80% of its funding every year from the U.S. federal government. And so in the same way that Tor like is used for both licit and illicit activities, in the same way that Tor both enables malign actors, but also like helps people break firewalls and censorship. It's sort of the same thing with Bitcoin.
Yeah, and so if you're like a think tank, how do you differ from lobbyists, or are you essentially a lobbyist?
Definitely not lobbyists. So there's a kind of a pretty rigid definition of lobbying, but essentially it is like receiving money to advocate sort of for a particular legislative outcome, like a yes or no vote on a piece of like extant legislation. So going to DC and saying, hey, I'd like to take 30 minutes and talk to you about why I think Bitcoin is good for America, or why I think Bitcoin is good for energy infrastructure, or why I think it's good for combating China. That's not lobbying. That's just like education.
What's the lobbying version?
Lobbying version would be So that's like what Coin Center does. Like they're a 501c4. I don't know if they're like registered lobbyists, but their nonprofit status allows them to like lobby. And so lobbying would be, hi, there's this piece of legislation that's being voted on soon. And section 2, whatever, line whatever, is written in this such a way that it creates like this outcome. You know, we want you to either vote no on this bill because of this reason, or we want this like wording to be changed to reflect this concern. So if you're kind of like in the weeds, like nitty gritty, you know, sort of trying to rally votes for or against something, trying to amend legislation that's like extant and being debated, that's when you're moving into like lobbying territory. Now, the IRS allows us to do a limited amount of lobbying. So a C3 can, it just sort of varies, and it's like a scalar. It depends on your sort of budget or whatever. But I think it's like up to 20 or 25% of our activities can be lobbying, but we sort of expect more scrutiny because we're a Bitcoin nonprofit. So we do very, very limited like lobbying. Like if there was another infrastructure bill type deal, we would probably like use all of the sort of lobbying points that we've banked up to work on that. But for the most part, 99% of what we do is just like advocacy and education.
And that education, what you're doing, the information you're putting in front of people, they're also seeing information come in from the likes of Greenpeace,
sure, yeah,
Ripple,
yeah,
DeFreeze.
Yeah.
Is this essentially like, I guess, like a debate, but without structure?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's certainly one way of looking at it. Absolutely. I mean, with way more sort of complexity, like you said, that lack of structure. But yeah, I mean, it's sort of a battleground of like ideas, because everyone comes into a meeting with whatever information they've read or heard. And so, yeah, I mean, a lot of times it's like you start a meeting and you're trying to ultimately, like in my role, at least in our role, you're trying to be useful, right? You're not trying to just like shove pro Bitcoin propaganda down people's throats. It's like, hi, like we're a group of academics. We know a decent bit about these topics. Do you have any questions for us? What is your office sort of thinking about these things? Like any questions about Bitcoin, we can answer for you. And so that's usually how we get into sort of like some of the energy debates. Or I heard Bitcoin used as much energy as a small country. Oh, okay. Well, did you know that, you know, Bitcoin only has, you know, about 2 times the emissions of like video games in America? Or that it only has about 4.5 times the emissions of YouTube, like alone? Oh, well, that's really different. You know, I thought it was horrible. It's like, well, yeah, actually some of this research is pretty bad, right? It doesn't account for the difficulty adjustment. What's that? Oh, let me explain. It doesn't account for the halving. What's that? Ah, let me explain. You know, so yeah, I mean, you kind of encounter the anti-Bitcoin research in your day-to-day doing something like this. And yeah, I mean, you kind of have to respectfully but forcefully push back on you know, junk science.
And the people you're in the end trying to influence is the people who make the decisions, who vote. It's the senators and the members of Congress. But you're not really speaking to them directly.
It's almost always staff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how does that work internally? Are staffers then collecting the information themselves, agreeing what they think, and then interpreted it for the senators?
Well, yeah, because I mean, when you think about it, like if you're a senator or congressman in America, technically you're responsible for knowing quite a bit about the world, and so there's no way a single person can kind of do that. And so every office has kind of an army of staffers, usually people that are like my age, like, you know, early 20s, usually in the sort of 23 to 30 range. And they do like all the legwork really. And so, yeah, like, but even those guys and girls are stretched thin. So, you know, you meet a staffer who's like, yeah, I work for Senator so-and-so, and I'm responsible for, you know, agriculture, transportation, and fintech or whatever. And so it's like they'll have it, you know, it's not like each office is going to have like a crypto person. Although, you know, I think the last year digital asset regulation was sort of one of the flashy like issues du jour in DC. And so I think I noticed a lot of offices would sort of bring someone into a meeting and say, yeah, this is our crypto person right here. But usually it's just some, you know, smart young person who has spent like 6 months like reading about it and they are like the de facto crypto expert for like that particular office. But obviously it's different. Like Lummis and, Davidson, like they're the people that have kind of, Elizabeth Warren, Brad Sherman, like on the other side, like there are, members who have made crypto regulation one way or the other a more sort of a larger part of their sort of policy work.
Well, even with Ted Cruz, my interview with him, whatever you think of him, his depth of knowledge on how Bitcoin works was impressive.
Yeah, Ted Cruz is a really smart guy. I mean, again, sort of not to get like political or whatever, but absent no commentary on sort of his politics. I've spoken with a lot of politicians in my life, and Ted Cruz was sort of like in a league of his own in terms of the depth of analysis that, I met him. It's like, boom, like he's really bright guy.